I'm Dr. Ken Landau. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about Tresiba, or insulin degludec. It's an ultra-long-lasting basal insulin that you take once a day. It actually can last in your system for over 40 hours and gives you great flexibility. It was approved as recently as September of 2015, marketed in January of 2016 for type 1 or type 2 diabetes. Originally, it was approved for individuals 18 years of age or older, but then in December of 2016, it got marketing approval from the Food and Drug Administration for children as young as 1 year of age, as long as they need at least 5 units. You have great flexibility with this particular type of insulin. Now, you should take your dose at the same time every day, but about a third of the people are going to miss a dose, fail to take a dose, or not remember to use the medicine as prescribed. So over the course of a month, a person will miss probably 3.5 injections. That's not good if you happen to have diabetes. But with Tresiba, you have a certain amount that's going to last for a long period of time in your body, so you're not going to get out of control. That means that when you remember, let's say you normally give yourself an injection in the morning. Now you remember in the evening that you didn't take the morning dose. Well, take it. That's okay. As long as there's at least 8 hours between the doses, you'll be fine. Well, when we look at this type of insulin, there's a constant concentration in the body. There's no peak activity. It starts to work within 30 to 90 minutes after you inject it. Since it's at the neutral pH, doesn't sting. And unfortunately, as with all insulins, they tend to be somewhat less effective if you're overweight or obese, which means that the first treatment for diabetes is really serious attention to diet and exercise. Tresiba is manufactured with recombinant DNA technology. They take an amino acid off one of the chains and they add a side chain of a fatty acid anchored to a glutamic acid, another amino acid. And it forms little lakes or pearls underneath the surface of the skin that are slowly dissolved. That's why it lasts so long. Now, when you get your pre-filled pen from the pharmacy, you should probably keep it in the refrigerator, and you keep it somewhere between 36 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't want to freeze it. But good news is that you can keep it out of the refrigerator for up to 8 weeks. So once you open the tube or open the syringe, you can go on a vacation for a real long time. You don't have to worry about having a refrigerator around all the time. Tresiba is not for people who have diabetic ketoacidosis, and it's certainly not for people who are using the insulin pump. Whenever you use an insulin, you should look at it, make sure it is clear and colorless. You don't dilute it with other kinds of insulin. And you make certain to rotate the sites. You pick your thigh, your abdomen, or maybe your upper arm. It's injected subcutaneously. It's not injected in the vein, and it's not injected in the muscle. And you have to remember, don't share the syringe, even if you happen to change the needle. Now, it comes in 2 different strengths, 100 units per milliliter or 200 units per milliliter. They're different color syringes, so you don't make a mistake. They have a little stub so that you can feel, if you happen to be colorblind, which one you're using. And the good news is, if you happen to switch from one to the other, you just still dial in however many units you use. You don't have to make any kind of calculation. Now, you have to inject the material with a needle, so you put a new needle on. You inject it into the skin after you've checked to make sure it's clear and colorless, after you've checked to make sure there's enough insulin to give yourself the required dose, after you've dialed in whatever your required dose is going to be. You inject it, you watch the dial go down to 0, and then you count to 6 before you remove the needle, because it's going to be slowly released over a period of time. So you don't want to take it out as soon as the needle gets to 0 or as soon as the gauge gets to 0. How do you start the medicine? Well, if you've never taken any insulin product before, you start with 10 units. That's sort of an average, and then you can go up from there. If you've been taking insulin, and another kind of insulin, and you're switching, say, from Lantus or something of that nature, then you just take the same dose. Don't have to make any kind of calculation. If you have type 1 diabetes, you use about a third or a half of your total daily insulin requirement as your basal insulin. That would be Tresiba. And then you use the rest just around mealtime. If you happen to be new to insulin, there are certain rules of thumb that you can use. Now, this medicine can be used by itself, or more commonly, it's used in combination with oral anti-diabetic medicines or other injectable medicines like Victoza, or it could be used with other types of insulin. So this is the basal insulin, but around meals, your sugar would spike, so you give yourself a short-acting insulin. If you're using the dose, but you don't seem to get the kind of control you want, then you wait 3 or 4 days in between the dose before you increase it. And certainly, you don't give yourself an injection if you happen to be hypoglycemic. Now, in addition to the pens, you have to have the needles, so you have to purchase them. You discard the needle after each use, and you put it in an appropriate container. You also should clean the skin with some alcohol. How does insulin work? Insulin works by increasing the use of glucose, the uptake of glucose, by the muscle and by the fat. It decreases the amount of glucose that's being manufactured by the liver, and it stops the breakdown of protein, stops the breakdown of fat, and actually increases the manufacturing of protein. Now, there are some types of insulin that are competitors. So we have Tresiba with the half-life of 25 hours that lasts for over 40 hours in the system. And then there's Lantus that's extraordinarily popular. It can last up to a day, but unfortunately sometimes it doesn't last up to a day, so you can be uncovered for a certain period of time. And then there's another one called Levemir, and Levemir, unfortunately, has to be taken twice a day, because even though they say it's long-acting, it really isn't so very long-acting. Tresiba seems to be every bit as effective as Lantus. We know that it helps improve people with type 1, type 2 diabetes. Side effects, most common, hypoglycemia, significant problem with all insulins. The onset can be sudden or it can be more gradual. Symptoms can be variable, and symptoms can change over time for an individual. And unfortunately, as you've had diabetes of long-standing duration, you'll notice that the symptoms become less noticeable. Now, the symptoms can vary depending on a variety of factors. The likelihood of your developing hypoglycemia might have something to do with the body temperature if you're in a hot bathtub. If you have increased blood flow to the area, that's going to help make the insulin get into the system more quickly. If your meal pattern has changed, or if the type of food that you're eating has changed, you're changing from carbohydrates to protein. Maybe you're starting a physical activity regimen. That's going to change the rapidity of absorption of the insulin. And certain drugs that you take might impact on the likelihood of developing hypoglycemia. So taking other kind of anti-diabetic medicines, or if you have high blood pressure and you're taking an ACE inhibitor, the Lisinopril, or a angiotensin receptor blocker, they can always impact on your symptoms. We know that people taking the fibrates or Prozac or MAO inhibitors or aspirin or even the sulfa antibiotics may be more likely to develop hypoglycemia. Symptoms of hypoglycemia, well, they range from maybe impaired concentration, maybe you feel a little jittery, maybe you have a slow reaction time that could put you at risk for a motor vehicle accident, or maybe if you're operating heavy equipment, you can be at risk. Sometimes hypoglycemia can be so severe it can be life-threatening. People can die. Certain medicines also can blunt the symptoms of hypoglycemia. For instance, the beta blockers, or clonidine, or reserpine. Some of the other side effects associated with any insulin may be fluid retention, swelling of the ankles. We know that's especially bad if you happen to be taking Actos, another type of anti-diabetic medicine, taken orally. If you give yourself an injection in the same spot all the time, the fat cells can either atrophy, shrink, and you can get a little divot, or they can hypertrophy, and then you can get a little bubble in the skin, That's very unusual, but sometimes people can get injection site reactions. You can get some discoloration, some bleeding, some bruising. Insulin also decreases the amount of potassium that's in the bloodstream. It moves potassium from the bloodstream into the cells. Well, you need a certain amount of potassium inside the bloodstream. Too low a serum potassium can lead to some heart rhythm abnormalities or some respiratory problems or even death. People taking insulin tend to gain weight. So if you have type 1 diabetes, you probably gain 1 or 2 pounds. If you happen to have type 2 diabetes, chances are you're going to gain 6 or 7 or 8 pounds. Obviously, diet is extremely important. As a side note to Tresiba, it was originally brought before the Food and Drug Administration in 2013. They were given an okay by an advisory committee to the Food and Drug Administration, but the whole Food and Drug Administration said, no, we're not going to accept it. We want you to show us that you're not going to increase the risk of heart disease. Because obviously people don't die of the diabetes itself. They die of related complications, of which heart disease is no question the #1 cause. Well, this was just after the European Medicines Agency, which is like the FDA in Europe, gave the okay to market Tresiba over there. Well, what happened is that started a DEVOTE trial in the United States. And this DEVOTE trial looked at about 7,600 individuals. The preliminary analysis was presented to the Food and Drug Administration in 2015. That's how they got the authorization in September of 2015 to market the drug. Well, just in June of 2017, at the American Diabetes Association meeting in San Diego, they presented the entire study. And what they showed was, #1, that there is no difference as far as cardiovascular events are concerned between Tresiba and Lantus, so just as safe as Lantus, but more importantly, the Tresiba reduced the likelihood of severe hypoglycemic attacks by 40% compared to Lantus. And if we look at the nocturnal hypoglycemia, so having severe low levels of sugar at night, well, with Tresiba, it was over 50% less than it was with Lantus. So now we have the Novo Nordisk company petitioning the Food and Drug Administration to say, hey, why don't you allow us to put that on the label? Why don't you let us say that it doesn't cause any kind of increase in the incidence of heart disease, even in people who are otherwise at high risk, and that our drug reduces the likelihood of problems with hypoglycemia. Now, there's some other drugs that might interfere with the action of insulin. So it might actually put your blood sugar up a little bit. Might be the thyroid drugs or cortisone, prednisone, antipsychotic drugs, maybe like Abilify or estrogen or the birth control pill, maybe a diuretic water pill, albuterol or epinephrine or some of the older HIV medicines, or even a tuberculosis medicine known as INH. And some things have variable effect on the blood sugar. So for instance, alcohol. Got to be a little bit careful of drinking if you're diabetic. If you take too much of the insulin, obviously you know what kind of problems you can get. They can range from severe hypoglycemia all the way to nerve damage and death. Interestingly, the company, Novo Nordisk, brought out, just in November of 2016, FDA approval, a combination of Tresiba and another drug they make that's known as a GLP-1 receptor agonist, medicine that you know as Victoza. They brought the combination out as Zoltafy. Now, you know about these medicines because if you watch the television, you see them advertised all the time. In 2014, Big Pharma spent $4,300 million advertising to you, the general public. 2015, that number was up to $5,200 million. You wonder why these drugs are so expensive? In 2016, they spent $5,700 million, and it's expected in 2017 they will spend more than $6,000 million, so you can go over to the pharmacy and you can buy cash price for 5 tubes of Tresiba, 5 pens that are going to last you probably the month on average, $525. If you have a coupon, it could be as low as $460. If you get the 200 unit per milliliter instead of the more commonly used 100, well, that's going to cost you about $630 cash, and you can get it for maybe about $560, $570, $580. But all of the drug companies now are playing the game to get you to use the product. They'll give you a co-pay savings card so that you'll say, hey, no skin off my back. We'll stick it all to the insurance company, and then they'll raise the rates next year, and we'll complain about that. And that's what they do with this particular drug. There's a co-pay card that allow you to pay as little as $15 a month per prescription. Well, in summary, this is a good, solid product. It's expensive, but not as expensive as some of them. Seems to give you a heck of a lot more flexibility and reduces the likelihood that you're going to have hypoglycemic episode at night. So if you need a long-acting basal insulin, we would endorse this product. However, don't forget the primary treatment for diabetes, type 2 diabetes, diet and exercise. You can't weigh 220 pounds or 230 pounds and expect an injection of insulin to resolve the situation in your blood sugar. Ain't going to happen. So be careful, be prudent, and be thin. I'm Dr. Ken Landau. Thanks for watching.